So the 5 advantages I'm going to present to you today in order are exclusive representation, legal and contractual protection. Third, the defense of your interests during negotiations. Then, broader access to the market and better compensation. And the 5th and final advantage I'll present is gaining credibility and professionalism. I'll start right away with exclusive representation. For a broker, obviously, becoming the official representative of a buyer is an advantage, and we'll see why in a moment. He also has a legal and ethical obligation to defend and promote his client's interests, whereas the seller's broker, when the buyer deals directly with the seller, does not have to promote or look after the buyer's interests or advise the buyer. He only has to provide fair treatment. This also allows me to talk to you about the roles, and we will briefly address the issue of conflict of interest and dual representation. So first of all, let's define the roles. So we have the seller's broker, and at the same time, the vocabulary I will use during the training will be this one, so that we all understand each other clearly. When I say seller's broker, I will be referring to the one who is associated with the seller and who has signed a sales brokerage contract. He represents and protects the interests of the seller and is paid according to his sales brokerage contract. The buyer's broker is the one who represents the buyer. He has signed a CCA with the buyer. He protects, defends, and advises the buyer, and he is paid according to his purchase brokerage contract. And finally, there is the collaborating broker. He is not contractually bound to the buyer. It is said that he does not represent the buyer. It is simply said that he accompanies the buyer in the transaction. Note the word, it's important. Even at the OCIC, when I talk with people in charge at the OCIC, people involved in training for accreditations or other matters, they also use the term accompanied, even though, in my opinion, you don't really find it. Not exactly as such in their publications, but they use it too. So the collaborating broker accompanies the buyer in their transaction by providing them with fair treatment. They must not advise them and must not make any representations that could go against the party who is paying them, that is the seller. Does a collaborating broker who doesn't have a buyer brokerage contract still have the right to receive compensation if they make an offer?
I would say yes.
Yes, absolutely. And why do they have that right? Because the seller's broker has an active brokerage contract in the transaction. All right? So either the buyer must be represented or the seller must be represented for there to be a contract in the transaction. As soon as there is a contract, everyone will get paid. It will work. If you accompany, and I do mean accompany, so that means without a contract, you are acting as a collaborator. You accompany a buyer in a transaction to purchase from a private seller, an FSBO. There is no contract on your side, there is no brokerage contract on the seller's side, so if you simply make the purchase offer, you won't be able to get paid. And it is absolutely impossible to write in the purchase offer that the parties agree to give you a fee. You need a CCV or a CCA to have the right to invoice someone. Is that clear for you now? The collaborating broker can be the buyer's broker or the seller's broker. Because the seller's broker, when the buyer shows up, has told the buyer that he represents the seller, not the buyer, that he will provide fair treatment, that the buyer will benefit from all the protections provided by law and all objective information, and that the buyer has the right and the option to go to another broker to submit their offer. If after all that the buyer says, no, it's fine, I accept fair treatment, the seller's broker will act with the buyer as a collaborating broker. Is that clear? He will have the same obligations as the seller's broker towards the buyer as if he was simply accompanying the buyer. We do not say, I am in a dual representation situation. I represent the seller, I do not represent the buyer, I am simply accompanying them. And of course, you will put your name on the offer to purchase. Because in section 2.1 of the offer to purchase, it does not state that it is the person representing the buyer. It says that it is the person through whom or by whose intermediary the buyer submits their offer. For now, I want to go back to a key definition, which is that of fair treatment. Who wants to try giving the definition of fair treatment?
I'll go ahead. Fair treatment means I give them the information I am allowed to share, except for perhaps sensitive information about my client that could influence things. Or, for example, if I know it's a divorce or the person is going bankrupt and I'm not supposed to share that. I know maybe I'm not saying it word for word how it should be, but basically that's how I understand it. When I give fair treatment, if I have information I need to share with them, regardless of whether I know it doesn't come from because a problem for my client, I still have to give them fair treatment.
Roland, that's right. I understand exactly what you're telling me, and that's it. To explain it clearly to your clients, you could maybe put it this way. I will give you access to all the information you need to complete your transaction. No information will be hidden, but it will only be information, objective information, okay? For everything else, anything strategic, confidential, or that could go against the interests of my seller client, unfortunately, I won't be able to share that with you. For example, how much he wants to walk away with, I am not allowed to tell you that, so there's no point in asking me. Don't ask me if the price is negotiable. Don't ask me if it's because of a divorce. Don't ask me whatever else, anything confidential or strategic. All I can tell you is what's written on the listing. That's objective, all right? For example, they might ask us for comparables if we don't provide any. Yes, I'm getting to that. We're going to look at the comparison table showing what the OICQ says a collaborating broker must or must not do versus a broker who is bound to the buyer by a purchase contract. We're getting to that, Dominique. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. Let me come back to fair treatment. It's very, very important. So there's one thing we often forget about fair treatment. Fair treatment applies to all parties involved in the transaction. And that also includes the represented parties. So fair treatment isn't just when there's no contract. If the buyer has a contract with their broker and the seller has a contract with their broker, both brokers still have to provide fair treatment to the other party. Because fair treatment isn't just for an unrepresented party. The term came about when the law changed and we started talking about it. But brokers have always been required to provide fair treatment to all parties involved. An example I can give you, Morten, is that you receive a purchase offer, piano included, piano excluded, with the pool minus $5,000 plus the piano, and then you go back and forth with counter offers, and on the last one you realize that the pool they wanted and the piano, in the end, they forgot to put it back in so they won't be included, but you know very well that it's a mistake and that's not their intention. But you can't take advantage of the situation and let a dispute arise. You really have to treat the other party fairly and make sure that their intention was indeed to exclude it and that they didn't just make a mistake. I'm giving you this as an example, but there are plenty of other examples, especially when it comes to providing information. If you know that there was an inspection report on the property, you provide it objectively. Yes, here it is, here's the report. You don't deliberately wait for them to ask for it or try to hide it. That's part of good collaboration and fair treatment because these are objective pieces of information. Is that clear for everyone? So, fair treatment means not disclosing confidential or strategic information that could harm the party you represent. And on the other hand, it means giving all parties who are not represented or who are represented but not by you all the objective information relevant to the transaction. Now, a quick note, be careful with open houses. Before I change the subject and talk about legal protection, I'm still discussing exclusive representation here. Be careful with open houses. There are a lot of issues right now with brokers. When it comes to the effective cause of the sale, Musa and I regularly get calls from brokers who say, well, my client went to an open house, then I met them. I quickly signed a brokerage contract to protect myself because I wanted to make sure I'd get my commission, and then I made the offer, and now they don't want to pay me. We're going to get paid through the purchase contract. We'll sort that out later. We'll talk about it again. But in the meantime, regarding the question of effective cause, I know that brokers who organize open houses don't always do what they're supposed to do. So, a quick legal reminder. Before the client enters and visits the property, you put up a big stop and say, before you go in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Pascal. I'm a broker with Charisma Properties. I represent the seller and I have to protect and promote their interests, so I won't be able to represent you at the same time. Please note that the law gives you the right to be represented by a broker. And if you choose not to be represented, you will still be entitled to fair treatment, all the necessary information and protection through my professional insurance. And I will be the one to handle the purchase offer. So if that works for you, come on in for the visit. Otherwise, I would prefer that you come back by appointment with your broker. If you do that, there won't be any misunderstandings. Because in the brokerage contract purchase, in clause 7.2, and I encourage you to take a look out of curiosity, there is a clause that states that despite any contrary stipulation, the buyer may attend open houses without their broker. But in that case, they must indicate that they are under a brokerage contract and name their broker. And after the open house, they must inform their broker that they are interested in the property. If you rely solely on that, you will still have a conflict regarding the efficient cause because the APCQ and the OSAQ do not agree on the issue. So you will need to demonstrate that you were the one who presented the property, and even if it wasn't a physical presentation, you will have to prove that you significantly interested the client and that you are the reason why they are making an offer. So the best thing is to be with your clients during the open house or to go by appointment at another time. Don't send your clients to open houses on their own, because even if the listing broker says stop and the buyer is curious and says, yes, I have a broker, but I still want to visit, you lose your collaborator status. You will still get paid because you have a buyer brokerage contract. But in that case, the buyer will have to pay the full commission. There will be no deduction. We'll talk about this technical detail again at the end of the training. So with that, I've covered the first advantage, which was exclusive representation. Now I'm moving on to the second advantage, which is legal and contractual protection. So the CCA, first of all, is a mandatory form. It's nice to remind clients that this form is prescribed by the government. So you're not just anybody. This isn't just any service. It's governed by provincial law. It's regulated by a self-regulatory organization, and this form was created by the government. So the client should feel reassured about working with a professional and know that these aren't just homemade forms, but rather they are the ones prescribed by the government. More than that, they are mandatory. The CCA also clearly defines the broker's obligations, because if you commit to providing service to a buyer and in the end, you go on vacation, you don't answer your phone for 2 months, you do all sorts of foolish things. At some point, the buyer will terminate the contract, or even if they end up buying. And if you claim your commission, they will refuse to pay you. It's just like with a seller. If you haven't properly fulfilled your contract, they can refuse to pay you. So it legally binds them to you, but it also gives you obligations toward them, which is in line with protecting the buyer and the public. The buyer also benefits from protection mechanisms provided by law, such as your professional insurance, etc. Also, there are specific clauses in the contract that protect the client, particularly within the agency's obligations. We'll cover that in another course where we'll talk about the contract in a more technical way, the contract itself, the clauses, and so on. If you're interested in breaking down forms together, looking at the clauses one by one and getting my advice on drafting them, I'll organize another session. I'd be happy to do it. For now, I just want to address the topic of mandatory disclosures. So the CCA notice and the CVAN notice. Are you familiar with these two notices? The CCA notice is the one the collaborating broker has their buyer sign to state that they're working in the interest of the transaction. So they're not working in the seller's interest, but rather in the interest of the transaction. In other words, in the interest of the party who pays them, meaning the seller and the broker. This means they can't make representations that could go against the seller's interests. For example, Mohammed, you receive a purchase offer and you tell your client, let's try to negotiate this, offer this amount. You wouldn't be allowed to do that if you were a broker, collaborator. You would be required to tell the buyer, offer whatever price you want. Right now, they're asking $450,000. Just tell me how much you're willing to pay. You take the order form, write the amount in section 4.1, and that's it. At most, if he asks you to justify the price, you could give him access to objective data. There's a bit of a difference of opinion here, with some other brokers saying that you shouldn't help the buyer determine the market value. Personally, I would tend to tell the client, I trust my colleague. If he listed it at 450, it's because that's the fair market value. That's fine, but I couldn't advise him on the price. Because if I did, and the seller's broker found out that I was making arguments with the buyer that went against his client's interests, he could report me to the ethics board. I heard that Mohammed was encouraging his client to make a bunch of extra inspections, additional checks. He even wrote special clauses for him and everything. Yet, he doesn't have a CCA. I don't think he's working in the best interest of my seller's transaction. He would have the right to. That's why it's so important for you to sign a purchase contract as well. We'll come back to that in a bit. I brought with me the OACQ brochure, which explains fair treatment. In it, there's a table that compares what a collaborating broker can do versus what a collaborating broker cannot do. CCA versus non-CCA. Let's take a look at that. When you don't have a contract with the buyer, you must verify their identity using a VI and have them sign the notice. CCA, which will accompany their offer to purchase, stating that they have been informed that you are not representing them and that you are working in the interest of the seller, or at least in the interest of the transaction. The CVAN notice is the same notice, and I remind you that it is mandatory at Charisma and at the real estate expert's office. When you are the seller's broker and you handle a straightforward sale by managing the transaction yourself, don't tell me that you are representing both parties. That's not possible. You represent the seller, you provide fair treatment to the buyer, and you assist them with their transaction. If your name is in clause 2.1 of the PA, that doesn't mean you represent them. They are buying through you as an intermediary. This entitles you to the collaborator's compensation, but in their offer to purchase, you are required to add the CVAN notice, which is the seller's broker's notice to the unrepresented buyer. So CVAN stands for broker seller to unrepresented buyer. You must add this notice to their promise to purchase in order to have written proof that you properly informed them that they had the right to be represented by another broker and that they accepted fair treatment. Is that clear? Is it a central document or is it an internal document? It's a document available in Instanet forms, but they've put it in the recommended section. One of the two they've made mandatory, the other they've made recommended. For us, we require it in every transaction when the buyer is unrepresented. The seller's broker is always responsible for the transaction. No matter what happens, the seller's broker is responsible for the transaction. So that means if you are the collaborating broker and something happens to you, you have an impediment, or there's a case of force majeure, the collaborating broker has the right to call your buyer and complete the transaction. He can't just say if the collaborating broker isn't there, the deal falls through. No, he is obligated to continue the transaction and see it through to completion. It is his obligation as the seller's broker. This also means that you, as the broker accompanying the buyer, so without a CCA, you must carry out the identity verification. If you haven't done it, if you didn't have time to do it, the responsibility falls to the seller's broker. Are you hearing me clearly here? You are the seller's broker. You are going to call the collaborating broker. You are going to say, Monica, did you do your identity verification? Then Monica will tell me, no, I didn't have time to do it. She says, no problem, do it or I'll take care of it. But I have to make sure that it gets done. And if Monica tells me, yes, I did it, I will say, perfect. Can you send me a written confirmation that you did it? And then Monica will send me an email, a message, a text in which she will say, I did the ID verification and I am taking this proof and putting it in the GED. Does that work? Is that clear for you? So as the seller's broker, I have to make sure that the ID verification was done and I need to keep proof of that. It would be acceptable if the collaborating broker refused to give me their ID verification since it contains private information. And under Law 25, they are required to protect that information and not give me access to it. However, they will have to tell me, I did the ID verification and I have proof of it in the file, and I take their written confirmation and keep it as evidence in the file. Now, I need to come back to the question of timing. So just to make sure it's been said and repeated, the CCA, you sign it as early as possible in the process. Okay? If you plan at any point to sign one or to ask the client to sign one, don't wait until you have an offer to make. That's too late. Because by then there was already advice you needed to give them during the visit. There were plenty of things to do before the visit. It's not the right time just before making an offer. And on top of that, it causes us at the agency level, and I'm not just talking about our agencies, but all agencies, a whole bunch of problems when it comes to efficient calls. If you had signed a purchase contract right from the start and then your client slipped away from you at some point, you would be sure to get paid. If you sign it at the very last second, it's contestable, and all the brokers who signed it after the offer to purchase didn't get paid. I guarantee you that. That's how it is. I invalidate contracts when they're signed after the offer to purchase because it doesn't mean anything. Sometimes I even receive contracts with no commission written on them. That's forbidden. You are not allowed to work for zero. If you want, you can put $1, but you can't put zero. All right? Be careful, because if you put $1 and then you lose the efficient cause case, or if your client buys an FSBO, you'll be paid $1 for your work. I don't recommend putting a small amount there, but rather the fair value of your services. 1%, 2%, 3%, okay? And then explain using clause 6.2 that there's a good chance someone else will be paying that amount. One last important thing regarding compliance, since we're on the topic, purchase brokerage contracts must be filed in DOSEM in the EDM without delay. So as soon as you sign a purchase brokerage contract, Sabrina, you put it in the EDM. Don't tell me, yes, but there's no offer. No, you put it in the EDM, period. That's the law. Article 1 of the Regulations on Record Keeping states that you must report to the agency without delay. So you sign the document, you put it in the EDM, period. An offer to purchase will come later, and that's great. You'll read it and you'll attach it to that purchase contract in the EDM because it's the same client making the offer. But you are required to submit your documents without delay. And please understand me clearly here. Now there's a client who calls the agency and tells me I'm a Spiridon client and I'm having trouble reaching him. We look in the database and say, as far as we know, you're not his client. We don't have a contract. What does that make us look like as an entity, as an agency, as the broker supervisor, if we don't even know we're connected to a consumer? Do you follow me? Do you see how important this is? It goes beyond your paperwork and the time you have to spend on administration. These are legal issues. So when you sign a brokerage contract for a purchase, you must put it into the EDM without delay. And when it goes through, you'll go back into the EDM to make the changes. Spade on. How are you going to put it in the file if you don't have an address or a listing? For a purchase contract, you don't need an address. You use the buyer's address. You create a purchase contract. It's not tied to a specific address. It's a search mandate. Okay. So the first advantage was exclusive representation. The second advantage is legal and contractual protection. Now let's talk about defending interests and negotiation. So here, obviously the broker can actively negotiate the price, conditions, and deadlines on behalf of the buyer. That's a real advantage. And if you're accompanying the buyer and you don't have a CCA, since I said accompanying, you shouldn't be negotiating on behalf of the buyer. You shouldn't be the one presenting the offer and saying, here's my client's offer. Because then the seller will ask, who are you working for right now? You're supposed to be working in my best interest by default, and now you're trying to convince me to lower my price. I sense that something isn't right here. That's not in the spirit of the law. So normally when you're just a collaborator, you should send your purchase offer to the collaborating broker. You have the right to present it, but you are not allowed to present it from a negotiation standpoint. You just have to say, here there's a buyer who asked me to accompany them. This is simply what the buyer is offering. That's it, period. You can negotiate a counteroffer because you want the transaction to go through. You shouldn't stay silent and pretend, just stand there like a post. But starting to negotiate by saying, that's not what my client wants, my client would like this, my client asked for that. From the moment you enter negotiation mode, there should be a CCA. Otherwise, you are no longer working in the seller's best interest, and that goes against the spirit of the law. Now, I'm going to take my comparison chart, which I have put together to help illustrate the differences and similarities between the two options, and read it to you in detail so you can clearly see and understand the distinctions between them. When you have a CCA, it means you visit the property with the buyer, you point out the relevant elements related to their needs, and you make them aware of aspects of the property that deserve further verification or a more thorough inspection. If you don't have a contract, the law says you visit the property with the buyer. So you see, a nuance has been removed here that says to point out the relevant elements and raise their awareness. So I just present the property. It's rather neutral and objective. If you are bound to the buyer, you fill out a promise to purchase form with the buyer. You advise them on the price, on the deadlines, and on other specific aspects such as inclusions and exclusions. You obviously make sure that these needs are clearly expressed, and you also advise them regarding the addition of specific conditions to the promise to purchase in order to further verify certain aspects of the property after the visit, such as the septic systems, the pool, or others. If you do not have a contract with the buyer, it is said that you fill out the promise to purchase form with the buyer without giving them your opinion, nor advising them on the various elements, but simply informing them objectively about the standard clauses to use. If you have a contract with the buyer, it is said that you recommend consulting experts related to regional or environmental particularities, let's say radon, pyrrhotite, or others, and you make this recommendation to the client. So, you are handling a transaction in an area where you know there is pyrrhotite, in the Trois-Rivières area, for example, and you tell the buyer you should still check for pyrrhotite, it's important. On the other hand, if you do not have a purchase contract, what the OACQ tells us here is to point out that the region where the property is located has certain environmental or geographical particularities, without, however, suggesting, recommending, or advising a more in-depth inspection. So you can see that in this table, I'll send it to you, okay? You can see that there are major differences between what we do when we have a CCA and what we do when we don't. Generally speaking, we say that fair treatment means providing objective information. It's not advising, it's not suggesting, it's not giving your opinion, it's not getting involved, it's not negotiating. And from there, now I come to the question of defending the client's interests to wrap up this advantage. Personally, I'd like to tell you, for me, Pascal, if a buyer says to me, I'd like you to just take a purchase order, draft an offer, and send it, I'll tell them, sorry, but I don't like working that way. I really enjoy advising my clients. I like going to bat for my clients. I like defending their interests. For me, it's not the transaction or the commission that matters. What's important to me are my clients. It's my relationship with the client. And if this offer doesn't work out, we'll make another one, but I want to be able to fight for my clients. I want to feel comfortable when I look at myself in the mirror and say, I earned my commission because I helped people achieve their goals, not just because I took an order and sent it off. That's how I operate. I buy a brokerage contract, and I would simply tell myself, clients who don't want to sign a buyer's contract are clients who simply don't want me, who don't want my service, who don't want my advice or my experience, and who don't want to be mentored through the transaction. That's fine, it's their choice. But as for me, I'm not willing to do the job halfway. I'm a good broker and I want to do the job thoroughly. And without a buyer brokerage contract, I feel like the law is kind of pulling the rug out from under me, and I don't like that. I don't like it. I don't want to work without a buyer brokerage contract. That could be a choice for you. Now, a piece of advice I've given to plenty of brokers I've met, and I already gave it to you earlier as well, is to tell your clients, come visit with me, meet me for the first time, come visit with me once or twice, and if you feel comfortable afterwards, sign. And if you're not comfortable, choose another broker, because I'm not comfortable working without a contract. I've talked about exclusive representation, legal and contractual protection, and defending your interests. There's also a matter of credibility and seriousness. If the buyer is ready to commit, if he's willing to have you take steps on his behalf and defend and protect his interests, then it's only normal for him to sign a contract. It's normal for him to agree to pay a fee. He's the one who wants the services of a professional. And if he doesn't want the services of a professional, don't insist on trying to serve him anyway. He doesn't want to come into the store. He doesn't want to be your client. All right. And that's when you lose. Now, you might say to me, Pascal, I can't afford to pass up and lose a transaction, but that's fine. Go ahead and do the transaction. If you're comfortable with it, go ahead. Okay? But if, on the other hand, later the broker refuses to pay you because you are not the effective cause, or if later you are blamed for having advised the buyer or things like that, you'll see. The importance of signing a contract afterwards, it only takes a few bad experiences to realize that having a contract is much more comfortable for both the buyer and the broker. Now be careful, I've talked a lot about the effective cause, and I know Musa is with us today. He really wanted me to emphasize this topic as well. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go over by about 15 minutes. We had a lot of questions and a bit of a delay at the beginning. So if that's all right with you, I'll finish around 11:15, 11:20 at the latest. The brokerage contract is not a solution to the effective cause of the sale when you think you've lost it. So if a broker tells you, wow, Rabbi, you're not the effective cause, unfortunately, I won't be able to pay you, you can turn around and sign a purchase contract. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And you'll get paid by the buyer. Except think about it, usually the collaborating broker's commission, it's already included in the price since it's the broker who pays you. And the seller will pay it out of the amounts owed to them at the notary's office. That means the buyer will have effectively included the commission money in their price, and since the broker will have kept it, the buyer will have to come up with your commission money a second time. This could affect their cash flow, it could affect their borrowing capacity, and it could also impact the transaction itself. It's possible that at the last minute, if he owes you $10,000 and doesn't have it, the deal won't go through at the bank. Are you following me? So the issue of the efficient cause isn't resolved by signing a CCA, it only adds a new problem. And I've had a lot of brokers who, in recent months, I've dealt with these cases, they tried to get out of it with CCAs, and when they finally realized that the invoice would be issued in their client's name, I even had one who said to me, yes, but it's a family member. I feel really bad asking a family member to give me $10,000 in commission, so I give it up. Now you really need to understand the purpose of the contract. The contract is a client hiring you to work for them. You can tell your family member, I'll only charge you $2,000, that's fine. You have the right to set a contract at $1. No one will ever know. That's up to you. But I'm telling you, if the collaborating broker doesn't give you the share that's written on the centrist sheet, what's written in section 6.1 of the contract will be your only pay and will be forced to invoice the buyer for it. All right? So think about that when you put an amount in that section. Educate your clients. Tell them in most cases I will be paid by another broker. If that's a problem for you, I can very well write in the brokerage contract that this contract is exclusive only for properties that provide for a commission, for example, so excluding FSBOs. One last thing now, and I'm coming back to what Aliyah said at the beginning, the CCA allows us two more things: to access another market, so a market other than properties already for sale through a broker, to obtain better compensation. So if the seller's broker offers you a 2% commission and you want 3%, at that point you sign a contract for 3%. Clause 6.2 of the buyer brokerage contract states that you must collect the 2% before claiming the 3% from your client. So 3 minus 2 equals 1. And so from the moment of signing, you inform your client. And as soon as you show them a property, and as soon as they're interested in a property, you show them the commission and you tell them, this house here is going to cost you 1. This house here, since he's giving me 2.5, it's going to cost you 0.5. And the amount it's going to cost them, you have the right to finance it, to include it in the financing. So you'll use an Annex R, and we'll talk more about that in another training session that will cover the technical aspects of the CCA, where the client pays you directly from their funds at the notary's office. And one last thing, when I was talking about an expanded market, you now have the possibility, for example, if a client says to you, Aliyah, you see the general store over there at the corner of Principal and Chemin. At that spot, there's a store. My grandfather used to run that store, and I don't know if it's for sale or not, but I absolutely want to buy it. I'm choosing you as my exclusive broker. Your mandate is to negotiate the general store for me. The general store located at the corner of such and such street. And Alia will go to the owner with her contract. She tells him, there is a buyer who has mandated me to come negotiate with you for the purchase of your property. Is it for sale? What would the price and conditions be? So you see, my purchase contract here legitimizes my work. My contract becomes like a passport to enter houses. I can go see an FSBO and tell them I have a buyer who wants bungalows, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. I'm coming to see your house to find out if I can offer it to my buyers or not. You have the right to do this visit, Mohammed, without a client at an FSBO. It doesn't matter. All right? Perfect. So to sum up, and after that, I'll open up a Q&A session. And since I've gone over time, those who want to leave, you can. The goal of today's training was to give an overview of the purchase contract and to give you arguments so that it might be a bit easier for you to explain the purchase contract to your clients, to better see the benefits of the purchase contract, and to avoid falling into the traps of complacency by saying, oh, it's fine, I'll do it for 0 because that's forbidden, or I'm not going to make a contract with him because he's my neighbor and I like my neighbor, but I don't want to force him to pay me a commission. One way or another, he pays you the commission because he's the one who brings the commission money to the table. Is that clear? So today we talked about the 5 advantages of the buyer brokerage contract. Let me repeat them for you. Exclusive representation, which is entirely to the buyer's advantage. Legal and contractual protection. Defense of interest during negotiations. Let me remind you that you are not allowed to negotiate the price and terms of the purchase offer if you are a collaborator. Finally, broader access to the market and better compensation. And then we also talked about the gain in credibility and professionalism. When you present a purchase offer, you say, my buyer here, I know him well, I have a purchase contract with him, we've been visiting properties together for quite some time now. That increases your credibility. If you were the seller's broker with 3 simultaneous purchase offers, would you give priority to the offers from a collaborating broker who doesn't know their clients at all? Who just took an order form, or would you choose the one from a broker who represents their buyers and defends their interests? I admit it would be easier to take the order form, that's fine, but I know that on the other side, the buyer who agreed to sign a contract is serious about their process. They really want a house. They're even willing to pay a broker to help them buy it.